Okay, it looks like our webinar has actually started. Dr. Pon, you were on mute, so I wasn't sure when we started, but it looks like we are live. And here goes another one of our wonderful tech talks. I love these tech talks. You know, it's just such wonderful presentations. But a very warm welcome to all our colleagues from across Asia Pacific, and indeed linking in from many other parts of the world. Thank you for setting aside time to join this APMEN Tech Talk webinar. As you heard a few seconds ago, please note that this webinar is being recorded and it'll be made available on the APMEN and the Aurene websites within a day or so. And details of these sites will be made available on your screens. The APMEN webinars are intended as learning and information sharing platforms. And today we are going to learn from an expert panel about simian malaria. Even within our Asia malaria community, there's a somewhat poor understanding of the extent of this issue, and its impact is underestimated. In a country like Malaysia, where Plasmodium knowlesi is now the most common form of human malaria, this is not a trivial matter. So I'm pretty sure I speak on behalf of all our audience members when I say, when I express sincere gratitude to our panel of speakers for your time and efforts to share your expertise with us today. So Indra and Brahm and Ibrahim, and also Dr. James Kelly, a very sincere thank you for the time that you spent putting together the presentations, the talks, and participating in this event. Thank you. Just briefly, we will have the 3 PowerPoint presentations back to back. Then I'm very happy to announce we are fortunate to have Dr. James Kelly with us from WHO as a member of our expert panel. And James will spend a few minutes explaining to us what the consequences are of persistent P. knowlesi malaria in countries aiming for transmission-free registration. These 4 presentations will be followed by the usual question and answer session. Our audience members can submit written questions anytime, at any stage during the presentation. Please use the questions, the Q&A box, not the chat box, please, because we monitor the Q&A box and we don't really monitor the chat box for questions. And I suggest you precede your question with the name of the panel member you would like to respond to your question. So for example, Indra, and then your question, or whoever it is you would like to have respond to your question. After the Q&A session, right at the end, there's a very short poll again, as usual. It's a quick 1 minute of your time, but it helps us. And I'd be grateful if you can just quickly tick the boxes. Okay, I think let's get going. Our first speaker today is Dr. Indra Vittilingam. Indra is very well known to all of us in Asia Pacific, indeed globally, highly respected figure. Indra is professor in the Department of Parasitology, University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur. Indra previously worked as a principal research scientist in the Environmental Health Institute, Singapore, and in the Institute for Medical Research, IMR, in Kuala Lumpur. She was awarded the Sandusham Gold Medal in 2007 by the Malaysian Society of Parasitology and Tropical Medicine. And then in 2017, she received Malaysia's Research Star Award for outstanding national research in tropical diseases from the Ministry of Higher Education in Malaysia. Very well-deserved award that was. So Indra, without further ado, over to you. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you again for making yourself available. Over to you, Indra.
Thank you, Leo. I shall share my screen first. Share.
It's full screen. Looks good. Thank you, Indra.
Thank you, Leo. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. The title of my presentation today will be Simian Malaria in the Light of Malaria Elimination. As you all know, Plasmodium knowlesi is the predominant species affecting humans in Malaysia. All countries in Southeast Asia have reported cases of Plasmodium knowlesi, with the exception of Timor-Leste. Now, besides Plasmodium knowlesi, there are other simian malaria parasites like Plasmodium cyanomogae and Plasmodium innui affecting humans in the region. And most of these cases are occurring in areas where human malarias have been reduced to very low levels. Now, this is the map of Southeast Asia. And as you all know, Southeast Asia is in the pipeline for malaria elimination by 2030. We have carried out extensive studies in Malaysia, but I must still say that we have not done enough. Now, if this is a graph showing you the cases of malaria in Malaysia, and as you can see, as the cases of human malaria has reduced, cases of Plasmodium knowlesi has become the predominant species. Actually, Plasmodium cyanomogae, a simian malaria parasite, was the first malaria parasite to infect humans. This happened in the laboratory where Don Alls was monkeys and infected mosquitoes. And they came down with Plasmodium knowlesi. And they believed that, okay, Plasmodium knowlesi can also be transmitted to humans. So they came down to Malaya then in the 60s to carry out more studies. But unfortunately, they did not find any cases of Plasmodium knowlesi. This is a picture of Don Alls in front of the Institute for Medical Research way back in the 60s. Now, besides Plasmodium knowlesi, we know that other simian malaria parasites are affecting countries in Southeast Asia. The first case of Plasmodium cyanomogae was reported from Terengganu way back in 2014. Then there have been reports of Plasmodium cyanomogae in Cambodia, in Sabah, in Sarawak, and recently there has been a paper in Indonesia, in Kalimantan part of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Kalimantan, Borneo. Okay, there they had hypothesized that there were cases of innui, Wildi, as well as Kutnii. In Pahang, we recently reported 2 cases of Plasmodium innui, and we were very fortunate that we were also able to incriminate the vectors in that area. We incriminated Anopheles crescens to be the vector for Plasmodium innui. And then in Thailand, there have been cases of Plasmodium cyanomogae innui as well as Wildi. And we also had a Danish traveler who visited Thailand and Peninsular Malaysia. And when he went back to Denmark, he was found to be infected with Plasmodium cyanomogae. Now, Yap and co-workers from our Department of Parasitology, they did some studies on archival blood samples, and they found that it showed the presence by PCR, it showed the presence of, besides knowlesi, there was also cyanomogae, innui, Kutnii, and I think Wildi. The paper has been published in EID. Now, one thing I must always say is that we are a hub for Southeast Asia, is a hub for Plasmodium knowlesi. And we have not been selfish. We have always been generous. We have exported cases to Australia, New Zealand, Japan, to Europe, I think Norway, Sweden, to Spain, and also as far as USA. So we have always been generous with our parasites. Now, recently, WHO Malaria Policy Advisory Group has come up with certain statements regarding the elimination of Plasmodium, of the human malaria parasites. So when countries are reporting hundreds or thousands of Plasmodium knowlesi cases, certification of malaria-free status should be postponed. And they feel that we need to strengthen control based on appropriate multidisciplinary approaches. While field epidemiology remains relevant and important, Molecular epidemiology is likely to play a role in surveillance, and it will eventually help to clarify issues related to transmission of Plasmodium knowlesi as the most effective forms for control. Now, this is a map that I always like to show. This is a map of Sabah, and this work was done around about 2011 to 2013. And here in this paper, they have shown very clearly that as human malaria cases are reduced, Plasmodium knowlesi increases. So it started with the interior division, where they had very low number of human cases, where they had almost eradicated the human cases, and Plasmodium knowlesi started to increase. So as it went along, it went from the interior division to the west coast to Kudat, Sandakan division, and finally now it is in the east coast in Tawau division where we are having more cases. So it is obvious that as we reduce and eliminate human malaria, we are going to see more and more cases occurring in Southeast Asia. Now, if we look at the data of the macaques, the results from macaque, this was published in 2021. And this is data from that we collected from 2004 to 2017. And we found that Malaysian Borneo has the largest number of macaque positives, followed by Cambodia, Singapore, and I can't see this, the last of my slides here. And overall, we find that Inuai and Cynomolgi are also showing very high numbers, are also highly prevalent in the macaques. In Sabah, Inuai was more prevalent compared to knowlesi and Cynomolgi. And in Sarawak, knowlesi and Inuai were more predominant, followed by Cynomolgi. And mixed infection in macaques is very common. But recent studies have shown that Plasmodium cynomolgi and Plasmodium inuai are the two predominant species occurring in the macaques. So if we look at the studies that have been done on the vectors, now this was the early studies that we did, mainly in Sabah and Sarawak, and in one state in Peninsular Malaysia. So we incriminated Balabacensis in Sabah, Latens in Sarawak, and Crescens in Pahang. And we found that these mosquitoes were biting in the early part of the night, and they were all biting outdoors. So their peak biting was between, in Sabah, Sarawak, it gets dark early. So their peak biting is between 6 to 8. And in Peninsular Malaysia, it is between 7 to 9 is where we have the peak biting of the mosquitoes. And in those days, we were very fortunate. We were able to do monkey-baited traps. So we did set up monkey bait traps at ground level at 3 meters and 6 meters. And we found that these vector mosquitoes were biting the macaques late in the night. They were biting between 21 to 1. And it is during this time that we have the peak, the gametocytes peak in the macaques during this time. So it shows how well adapted they are. They pick up the gametocytes late in the night from the macaques, develop them into sporozoites, and then infect them to humans in the early part of the night when we are outdoors. And our latest studies that we have done in Peninsular Malaysia shows the similar trend where the peak biting is between 7 to 9. We have not published this data yet. It will soon be published. And we have also found that both our studies, our earlier studies and our latest studies has also showed us that the parus rate of the mosquitoes are very high. That's between 60 to 70% of our mosquitoes are parus. Parus mosquitoes means old mosquitoes that are able to transmit the parasites. So it shows that two things, either our control methods are not working, or perhaps no control measures are being instituted. And this is showing you the mosquitoes that have been positive during all our studies or some of the other studies that have been carried out. And looking at the infection rate, now you know that most of the cases have been occurring in Sabah and in Sarawak compared to Peninsular Malaysia. But from our latest study in Peninsular Malaysia, we found that more mosquitoes are positive in Peninsular Malaysia compared to Sabah and Sarawak. So we found that we examined 1,652 Anopheles mosquitoes, but of this 600 and about 600 over mosquitoes were the Anopheles leucospirus group. And we had 24 of them positive for midgut and 22 positive for salivary glands. And the predominant species were Cyanomogai and Inuai. Unfortunately, we did not have any Plasmodium knowlesi positive mosquitoes. So this shows that our mosquito positives and the macaque positive, there is a correlation between them. And so perhaps if we really look out for cases in human, we will find more cases in human, perhaps they are asymptomatic. Now, with regards to other mosquitoes, we can discuss that during Q&A. So here I'm mainly emphasizing on Plasmodium, on Anopheles, the leucospirus group of Anopheles mosquitoes. And all these papers have been published except for the last bit of the bionomics work that has been done in Peninsular Malaysia. So we know that human malaria transmission is the mosquitoes transmit them from human to human. And for simian malaria, we know that the mosquitoes pick up the parasites from the macaques and transmit them to humans. But is human to human malaria transmission occurring is the big question. And of course, more work needs to be done with regards to this. And of course, there's a certain amount of information which shows that to a certain extent, human to human transmission is taking place. And we know that with deforestation, macaques have come from deep forest towards forest fringes. And we believe that the Anopheles leucospirus group of mosquitoes have followed these macaques to forest fringes, especially in Peninsular Malaysia. Why I say especially Peninsular Malaysia is because during the time when we had a large number of human malaria cases, we do not come across the leucospirus group of mosquitoes. It is only now when simian malaria is prevalent that we are finding more and more mosquitoes of the leucospirus group. So we feel that when humans from the villages move towards farm and forest, they are getting infected. So moving forward, we know that the vectors exhibit anthropophagic, exophagic, and exophilic tendencies. The breeding sites are temporary pools, puddles, wheel ruts, and long-tailed macaques are prevalent in this region, and many people are asymptomatic. So what do we do? Now we know the tools for malaria control. IRS, DDT was a miracle insecticide that helped with human malaria transmission. And when mosquitoes became resistant or when mosquitoes refused to rest on the walls, then we introduced ITNs and NLINs, and we know that they have reduced malaria to a large extent. But now we know that from the works that has been done, we know that both these methods are not going to work for simian malaria, especially because the mosquitoes are biting outdoors in the early part of the night and people are getting infected when they visit to the forest. So can we think of larval control, environmental modification methods? Now, one thing I like to stress is that the history of malaria control in Malaya, Sir Malcolm Watson, who was a medical doctor, he was treating cases in 1921. This was in 1921, and there were drugs available for malaria. But even at that time, he still felt that we need to control the vectors so that with the reduction in the vector distribution, the number of cases of malaria will come down. So he did a lot of clearing and draining of foothill swarms around the town so that he reduced the Anopheles maculatus breeding, which was the predominant vector. And in the port area, bunding or tidal gates were built to prevent salt water from mixing with fresh water. And other environmental techniques were also constructed to reduce the breeding of Anopheles mosquitoes, and they were successful. But now, how do we control the breeding of these leucospirus group of mosquitoes? They are breeding in muddy grounds, in clear ground, ground pools, track tires, slow-moving streams, and partially also in shaded areas, mainly in forested regions. Can we use drones to tackle these breeding grounds? This is one question that I pose. And mosquito repellents. Now, repellent lotions may provide personal protection against outdoor biting mosquitoes. A cluster randomized trial from Ethiopia has shown that mosquito repellents are potentially effective to reduce malaria transmission. This is human malaria. However, a cluster randomized control trial in the Greater Mekong region has shown that mass distribution of repellents did not work. And also a systematic review also showed that it was not really effective. However, we feel that perhaps deep impregnated anklets and wristbands may be more cost effective for people going into plantations and forests, because they're only using 30% deep, and they just need to use this when they're going out or when they are outside their houses. The bands are not in use, they can always be put in sealed plastic bags so that they will last longer. So this may be a more cost-effective way to use repellents than just to apply repellents as a lotion on the body. And the other one I was thinking of was ivermectin. Ivermectin is an effective endectocide against parasites and vectors. It has been approved for use in humans as well as in animals. And it has been shown that cattle treated with ivermectin reduced the survival of the vector mosquitoes of Dirus and Epiroticus. And mosquito ingestion of ivermectin inhibited sporogony of Anopheles gambiae when ingested before, with, or after parasite ingestion. And a recent study in the Greater Mekong sub-region has shown that mass drug administration has the potential to prevent malaria transmission. This is again human malaria. And a single dose of IVM administration substantially reduced transmission in West Africa. And recently, a mass drug administration trial, it was an RCT, they found that mass drug administration and IVM, ivermectin, reduced mosquito density and entomological inoculation rate in the Gambia. So can we target ivermectin on non-human primates to reduce vector population? Thus, in conclusion, I will say that with malaria elimination, simian malaria become more prevalent. Macaques are infected with Inuai and Cynomolgi, and mosquitoes also seem to be infected with Inuai and Cynomolgi. So it is pertinent to screen people living in high-risk areas, not just for PK, but for other simian malarias as well. When a case of PK is reported, proper case investigations should be carried out. MBS perhaps should be done, and vector studies should be undertaken at appropriate sites. Now, we cannot advocate anophelism without malaria, because we know that Anopheles can pick up the simian malaria from macaques and transmit them to humans. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. But before that, I would like to thank everyone who has been working with me from 2005 until now. All of these papers have been published except for one paper that's on the binomics paper, which Nanda, my student, will be publishing it very soon. He passed his PhD with a distinction just recently. And I have another student, Sandhya, who is working on the GPS distribution of the vectors of Knowlesi, and we hope that will be very useful once it is published. And I would like to thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.
Indra, thank you so much. Fascinating, wonderfully comprehensive overview, digging into a bit of history there as well, and exploring possible avenues for control of the vectors. Excellent presentation, and I'm sure people have a much better understanding now of the nature and scale of the problem presented by P. knowlesi and others, Anomalgi, Inui, and so on. So thank you for that, Indra. You made mention that Malaysia has been very generous in sharing of its cases globally. I couldn't help but smile. I'm not sure those recipient nations are very grateful, but it's a kind gesture from Malaysia anyway. So thank you, Indra.
At least they can get the parasite.
Exactly. Yeah. So I want to ask the patience of our audience, if you don't mind. So we're going to try and save all the questions for after all the speakers have presented. And that is because quite a good number of our audience members have informed us they can't stay for the full duration. And, you know, could we try and give the presentations and then cluster the Q&A session at the end? So that's the way we've been doing it in recent times. So there were some hands raised, I think, as well. So I'm asking you, please be patient. We will address your questions, but let's postpone that until towards the end, after all four presentations, that is. So again, thank you, Indra. Excellent presentation. Sets the bar very high for the rest of our webinar. Our next talk is by Bram van der Straat, who's a medical entomologist currently working as a PhD student with the Australian Institute of Tropical Health and Medicine at James Cook University in Cairns. Bram is deeply involved with the ZooMal project, and that stands for Evaluating Zoonotic Malaria Transmission and Agricultural Land Use in Indonesia. And Bram has been working on that project since 2020, in which he is investigating the role of mosquito vectors in the transmission of zoonotic malaria to humans in different landscapes. We're looking forward to your presentation, Bram. Thank you for putting that together. Over to you, Bram.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction, Leo. Let me just share my screen real quick. So, welcome. My name is Bram, and I'm from the Netherlands originally, and therefore I absolutely love peanut butter, as do most Dutchies. But when I go to the store and I look at the ingredients list, it almost always says includes vegetable oil, including palm oil. And that is actually a problem, and that is the link between peanut butter and sick people in Southeast Asia, because palm oil has to come from somewhere, and it comes from here. This is, as you may or may not know, a palm oil plantation, and it's kind of devoid of life, but it still includes these little gullies in between. And these are actually really good breeding sites for mosquitoes. And these are also really good resting sites for macaques. And as you may or may not recall from Indra's presentation, macaques and mosquitoes combined can be pretty nasty. They can, of course, lead to zoonotic malaria. And this is super relevant. I will repeat this very quickly because Dr. Indra already mentioned a lot of this. Zoonotic malaria can cause a very severe disease in adults and children, despite relatively low parasite counts. And it's often still not recognized or misdiagnosed even, also by PCR methods. And it is, as we saw, a very fast increasing problems in many regions in Southeast Asia. Also in regions of very low human malaria transmission. And well, probably Dr. James will tell us more about this, but it might prevent WHO malaria-free certification for certain countries. And zoonotic malaria is usually monkey malaria, but these monkeys, the macaques, they don't get really sick. It's a chronic but very benign illness, so they deal with it very well. And Plasmodium knowlesi is the most important and most well-known species, but there are definitely many others, as we just heard from Dr. Indra as well. And it's widespread in Southeast Asia. This is a already outdated map from 2013, and it shows all the Plasmodium knowlesi infections in humans in blue and in red in macaques. So it's all over the region, and since when this map was published, cases have spread massively. As the dominant malaria species in humans in Malaysia, and it is quickly becoming that in other countries as well. So why has it not been seen earlier? Well, it has been seen earlier by Don Iles and others in the 60s already, but it was never considered a real threat for humans because it was considered a forest malaria. And as humans venture out in the forests, as we'll see, they can get infected. So that's why it was never considered a real problem until 2 decades ago. So when humans and macaques live in the same habitat, Plasmodium knowlesi parasites and other simian malaria parasites can jump to humans. And it works like this. So on the top half of the panel, we see the monkey and the mosquito in a natural and zootic cycle. And the mosquito bites the monkey, gets infected probably by a simian malaria parasite, and just bites another monkey. However, when humans enter this cycle, the mosquitoes get also attracted to humans. So a monkey probably gets infected, and an infected mosquito then bites a human. And that is a real issue because humans can get very, very sick. And these parasites need the mosquito vector. And the Leucospherus group of mosquitoes are, as we know right now, the most important vectors for simian malaria parasites, including Plasmodium knowlesi, but also Plasmodium centimolgi and others. So a Leucospherus group and a Leucospherus complex are considered very important. But what do we mean by complex mosquitoes? A complex mosquito or a mosquito complex is working in a species group usually. And a species group is morphologically similar species. So they look similar, but not the same. You can distinguish between them. And this includes often several complexes and other species, like the Leucospherus group, which includes the Leucospherus complex, consisting of at least 4 species, and the Dirus complex, consisting at least 7 species. These are the medically important species for humans, but there are many more actually. So one species complex that consists of different biological species that look almost exactly the same, and they're often termed cryptic or sibling species because they're so indistinguishable. And this is, for instance, the Leucospherus complex, which includes Anopheles Leucospherus sensu stricto, Anopheles latens, Anopheles balabacensis, and Anopheles intralatus. And actually, we know very little of these mosquitoes. And everything we know is just from a couple of papers. Here in green in the table, we can see everything we know from at least 5 publications. And on the left, we can see the species that all are known to have once or twice or more been affected by Plasmodium knowlesi. Here at the top, we see the WHO entomological indicators, and we know a lot, relatively a lot, about occurrence and density of the mosquitoes. But when we're looking at biting time, biting location, and for instance, resting location, we just don't know where these mosquitoes rest. And this will be very critical as we see further on in the presentation. This is a small map of which shows the origin of all the knowledge, like the published literature I just showed in the table. And although this may be already outdated because a lot of research has been going on recently, we see that much research comes from Malaysia, both Peninsular Malaysia and Sabah, and a bit in Sarawak, but in the mainland Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Vietnam, there's not that much research going on. And in Indonesia, we're actually currently researching a lot about mosquito vectors for simian malaria. So that will be published in the coming years. But at the moment, we're basically walking blindfolded. So what are we looking at in these recent studies? So we're looking at core behaviors, and core behaviors are behaviors that are essential to the survival of an individual. In this case, the mosquito, of course. And this includes, among others, host preferences, biting time and location, resting behavior, and larval habitats. I will just skip over these real quick in the coming slides. And we use these core behaviors to estimate the risk of infection. I mean, when you have a mosquito with a certain preference for humans, then you can, when you know when it bites, you can calculate how many humans there are likely to be infected at that time. And when you know where a mosquito rests, you know where to apply IRS, for instance. Because these, yeah, well, like I said, they're critical for successful application of control methods. When you know that mosquitoes bite outside early in the night, then bed nets are not that efficient, and we need to use other control methods for mosquitoes. So diving into the Anopheles leucospherus, because it's the most important as we know now. The host preference of Anopheles leucospherus is actually varying. A host is a human or animal that provides a blood meal, and the blood is necessary to develop the eggs. And all these mosquitoes in the complex have a preferred host. That can be monkeys, that can be humans, that can be cattle. And that actually varies between species. And we know that monkeys are often bitten, but humans are just as likely to be bitten as monkeys. And recently in Indonesia, we did a small study with a cow, and the cow was absolutely hammered with mosquitoes as well. So these mosquitoes definitely have a tendency of biting different animals. And after collection of these mosquitoes, we can calculate the proportion of mosquitoes that have taken a human blood meal. We can calculate the human blood index, and the higher the human blood index, the more dangerous and the more risk of malaria transmission. And this is, of course, this is not unique for simian malaria. This is for general malaria as well. So where are we likely to get bitten? Well, Anopheles leucospherus, the entire complex, is originally a forest mosquito. So it occurs deep in the forest and sometimes on forest. And people entering these forests will get bitten, like loggers and miners and hunters. And this mosquito will fly to forest fringes, but as we found, also to cleared land and even into villages, as long as there are blood hosts. And these blood hosts can be humans. I was doing research a couple of months ago in Indonesia, and we were staying just in a village, and a colleague of mine swatted the mosquito. It happened to be Leucospherus. So they will definitely enter, maybe not buildings, but villages. And we also see that indoor biting can occur at low densities, although the cases of these have been very, very sparse. In Sarawak, it has been found biting in a longhouse, and Anopheles dirus in Vietnam has been found in huts on farmland. Now, these huts look a little bit like this. So there are many open eaves and open holes in the walls, so mosquitoes can enter really, really easily. So it is a little bit of debate if this is real indoor biting or just seizing the opportunity. So there is an interesting conundrum actually going on, at least that's what the data shows. So these Anopheles leucospherus mosquitoes may have height-dependent host choice, which means that in the 80s, they found a higher human biting rate in the canopy. So they literally put a human up in the canopy of the tree, around 20 meters, I think, and they paired it with human collecting mosquitoes on the ground, and they found that the human in the canopy was getting bitten more often. And in the 2000s, they repeated this a couple of times, and there were human biting rates higher on the ground, while macaque biting rates were higher in the canopy. So this already shows an interesting pattern. And then in the 2017, paired human landing catches in the canopy and on the ground showed higher human biting rates on the ground. So there is not enough data to actually really say something about it, but it's very tentative to conclude and to research in the future if Anopheles leucospherus mosquitoes are changing their behavior. But it's actually quite difficult to climb a tree in, for instance, Kalimantan or Sumatra, where they're pretty high and sort of dangerous. And it's also quite difficult to deploy macaque-baited traps these days. So larval habitats, which are very hard to find, and we're actually working on this in Indonesia at the moment, but they're located in remote and pretty inaccessible areas, in forests and forest fringes, in these little patches, which are actually a pain to walk through. Plus, these mosquitoes have a flight range of 1 to 2 kilometers, which means that when an adult mosquito emerges from a pupa in a water body, it can fly up to 2 kilometers, and crossing a forest in Southeast Asia for 2 kilometers is a really hard work. So that's why larval habitats are still mostly unknown, but we know a little bit from sister species, mainly from Anopheles dirus, and this includes temporary freshwater pools and puddles, and it's actually almost always, we saw this in Indonesia as well last July, partially shaded and still water with not that much vegetation. But yeah, it can be ground puddles, elephant footprints, wheel tracks, all these water bodies that can sit there for 10 days or 2 weeks and then just disappear again. So that's an extra factor that makes it real hard to find them. But we have found them, and a publication is on its way somewhere next year, I hope. So this is like the situation in Indonesia, where you have a house or a farm or a small village in the center, and is surrounded by little forest patches with suitable breeding sites, or here a rubber plantation with a large potential breeding sites for mosquitoes, and especially for leucospherus mosquitoes. So when these people sit on the porch outside at night, which they often do, they get absolutely from everywhere hammered by mosquitoes. So the infection risk is actually pretty high. And well, of course, for transmission to humans, you need vectors, you need reservoir hosts like the macaques, and you need this interaction between reservoir hosts and humans. And this is demonstrated by the amplification dilution effect. So a higher vertebrate diversity means dilution. Mosquitoes can bite also cows or also other small vertebrates, while a lower vertebrate biodiversity means amplification of biting. So a lower number of different blood hosts, but for instance, only macaques and humans, means concentrated focused biting of mosquitoes on macaques and humans. And we think that changing human land use shifts the balance between dilution and amplification. So like you saw in the beginning, the palm oil plantation, only macaques live there and humans live there. So, and sometimes the occasional cow. So when a mosquito bites a macaque there, it's very likely to either bite a macaque or a human. So that actually biting. but these are called drivers for transmission. But I must say that most of this are still hypotheses, because fragmentation of forest is probably the strongest environmental driver, but it has only up till now been demonstrated in Sabah, where human activities in forest fringes and disturbed forests really led to a spike in infections, and especially occupation is a major risk factor there. You can imagine when you're a palm oil plantation worker and go out there every day from sunbreak to sunset, that your infection risk is a lot higher than when you're living in the city and being an accountant. And we also saw there that forest clearing forces macaques into human territories. So they're actually foraging on palm oil plantations and farmlands and villages because they have nowhere else to go. And these mosquitoes will very happily follow their blood hosts and interact more with humans as well. And like I just explained, large-scale forest clearing weakens any dilution effect because all the smaller vertebrates and just get chased away or die. And that is a real problem because only macaques and humans are left. But these are still well, strongly founded, but still hypotheses. We're actually working in Indonesia with the Zumal project to establish these hypotheses and see if they're true there as well. So if you'd like to read more about that, please read the article that we published last year, because it's pretty interesting and I actually like it. Thank you. This was my presentation. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. And I would really like to thank the Zuma project for enabling me to do my research together with University of North Sumatra and Menzies School of Health Research and James Cook University, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bram. Wonderful, excellent presentation that complements that one given by Indra. You focused quite a lot on the vectors, told us a lot about which vectors are involved, where they're breeding, where they're biting, etc. So that was a great complementary aspect, just expanding on what Indra was telling us earlier on. So again, I'm sure there's going to be questions coming in from the audience, but can we save that until after all the presentations are done? And I'd like to encourage, I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, so please audience, please feel free to pop questions into that Q&A box, and we'll deal with it at the end of the three presentations. So we're going to move on now to our third presentation, which is by Dr. Ibrahim bin Said, who completed his PhD at the Malaria Research Unit, ICBMS, University of Lyon in France. And Ibrahim's research interest is around non-falciparum malaria parasites in Indonesia. His current research is on zoonotic perspectives of Plasmodium knowlesi in Indonesia. So Ibrahim, we're looking forward to what you're going to share with us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your efforts. Over to you, Ibrahim.
Thank you, Dr. Leo. Can you hear me clearly?
Can you please speak louder?
Check. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, a bit better now.
Okay. Can I confirm you all see my screen?
No, we can't see your screen. That's great. We see you, and now it's full screen as well. Okay. So please proceed, Ibrahim, but remember to hold your microphone close to your mouth if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leo. Okay, very well, wonderful presentation from Dr. Linda and nice research from Trump. Now I'll be talking about simian malaria plasmodium knowledge as a newcomer in Indonesia, a global picture of plasmodium knowledge transmission in Indonesia. Before heading into general situation of Pinoleza in Indonesia, I would like to summarize a brief history of Pinoleza. The history started in 1927 by Giuseppe Franchini, and in 1940s, Pinoleza used as agent for neurosyphilis. In 1965, the first case of natural infection in humans was reported from Malaysia. In 2004, a huge number of confirmed cases Pinoleza was reported in Malaysia. In 2010, first case was reported in Indonesia, especially from Kalimantan. And last year, accumulatively, more than 23,000 cases were reported in Southeast Asia. In the WHO annual report on malaria last year, Pinoleza wasn't included in reported malaria cases by patients. Voila, here is the map of the distribution of malaria due to Pinoleza infection in Southeast Asia. As you can see here, Malaysia is number 1 in terms of cases, followed by Indonesia. And we have to admit that Malaysia is more experienced compared to the neighboring countries. This is evidenced by the downward trend in cases over the past few years. Regarding the life cycle of Pinoleza, it has a fairly short time in the erythrocyte cycle. It is just 24 hours. The research confirmed by Dr. Indra, I think it was 10 years ago, about the cycle of erythrocytes in Plasmodium knowledge. This capability can certainly increase the level of parasitemia in the human body, which can trigger severe malaria. Regarding the appearance of Pinoleza under the microscope, it is very difficult to distinguish from other Plasmodium, such as you can see here, P. falciparum and P. malaria. Pinoleza also can be a threat if the patient has the following condition, as you can see in this table. Several deaths confirmed Pinoleza reported in Malaysia, as you can read in annual report last year. The question is, how about Indonesia? How about the transmission of Pinoleza in Indonesia? In Indonesia, the confirmation case of Pinoleza used only by PCR. Until last year, there is no death confirmed due to Pinoleza. Regarding the treatment used in Indonesia for the Pinoleza, we recommend digital buprenorphine and primatin in the day 1. The question for the person that has risk infection of Pinoleza, the answer is, as you can see in this slide, the person who has a job in the forest, like agriculture, mining, etc. An overview of Pinoleza transmission in Indonesia. Maybe you are interested. You can read in our article titled Systematic Review of Plasmodium knowledgeai in Indonesia, Risk of Emergence in the Context of Capital Rotation to Kalimantan, Borneo. In this article, we review articles on P. knowledgeai in Indonesia published in international and domestic journals. This is the distribution map of P. knowledgeai sector in Indonesia. As you can see here, there are Anopheles tracans, Anopheles introlatus, Anopheles balabacensis, and Anopheles leucophil. In Indonesia, there are 3 species that are suspected to be hosts of P. knowledgeai: Macaca fascicularis, Macaca nemesina, and Presbytis melaloca. This is the map of the distribution of the cases malaria confirmed P. knowledgeai in Indonesia. The most cases was reported in North Sumatra, as you can see in this slide. There are 377 cases from Langkat, Batubara, and South India. And you can see also in this slide the location that we can found Macaca fascicularis. Basically, in Indonesia, Macaca fascicularis is easily found not far away from the people where live. Conclusion for this section: our review result, there are 545 cases of P. knowledgeai malaria reported in Indonesia from 2010 up to 2021. And the most cases were reported in the last 4 years. Also, there are difficulty to distinguish between P. knowledgeai and other plasmodium. The next point is Nusantara, the relocation of capital from Jakarta to East Kalimantan. We call it Nusantara. The interesting about East Kalimantan as a new capital of Indonesia, in 2019, there are 5 cases of death due to malaria non-zoonosis. It means 10% of total death due to malaria in Indonesia. Malaria non-zoonosis. Although recent studies suggest that there is no parallel relationship between the number of knowledgeai cases in Sabah Sarawak, Malaysia, Borneo, and cases found in Kalimantan, but we can found 3 factors of species of sector species in Kalimantan: Anopheles tracans, Anopheles balabacensis, and Anopheles leucophil. In terms of hosts, there are 2, which is Macaca fascicularis and Macaca nemesina. The conclusion for this point is, first, change in the function of greenland will contribute to the increase in malaria cases, including zoonosis. And it is possible to find natural cases of mosquito-human infection before 230, which is target of malaria elimination in Indonesia. And there will be an increase in the number of P. knowledgeai cases after the survey continues. The fourth conclusion: the construction worker of the new capital are the people particularly vulnerable to P. knowledgeai infection. And the last, as Indonesian, I would like to propose to WHO will give Indonesia more time or even opportunity regarding confirmed cases of phenolizide in relation to malaria elimination certification if before 2030 there we will found mosquito-human infection of phenolizide. As most of the my presentation were adaptation of our article, I would like to thank all those supported parties of my research. I think I've gone over time.
Ibrahim, before you stop sharing, please keep your presentation up.
Okay.
A great presentation. Thank you, Ibrahim.
Thank you.
So I noticed there's a question in the Q&A box that relates to symptoms of disease caused by P-Nolzi. And one of your slides showed the different conditions. If you wouldn't mind going back to that slide. There we go. Just give us a minute. You passed over this one quite quickly, Ibrahim. So respiratory distress, shock syndrome. I know somebody like Prudence would be interested in seeing this. Jaundice, severe anemia, hypoglycemia, acidosis. Yeah. All right. And then there was a slide that showed, if I remember correctly, about 23,000 cases. A slide before, I think. No, it was another.
This one?
Yes, 2021. This impressed me. More than 23,000 cases in Southeast Asia in 2021. That's pretty impressive.
Cumulatively, it's not just in 1 year, but
okay, cumulatively. Okay, yeah. All right, I see. Still, okay, that's insightful. Ibrahim, thank you so much. Added more, interesting facts over there for us to add to the jigsaw puzzle. I'm sure we all understand simian malaria a little bit better now, and that's due to the 3 presentations that were given so effectively. Thank you to our 3 speakers. We're going to get to Q&A session now, but before we dive into the various questions that have already been submitted by our audience members, I'd like to ask Dr. James Kelly if he could give us some perspective from the World Health Organization on this murky issue of Plasmodium knowlesi clouding the elimination expectations of countries. James is in the Western Pacific Regional Office of WHO in the Philippines, and we're very grateful that you have so patiently sat through this webinar to share with us these important considerations, James. Thank you for your patience and persistence. We're very grateful. Over to you, James, if you want to share a few words of wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you, Leo, and no worries at all. It's very interesting to hear from our colleagues, and the experts in the field are what we need to learn from, and how we decide how to progress will come from those of us who are dealing with simian malaria cases in the region. And as I think, as Dr. Indra and Brahm and Ibrahim have so delightfully presented and hinted at during their presentations, it's very clear to all of us that simian malaria has implications for certification of WHO malaria-free status, which we all also realize is an official and important recognition of a critical public health achievement, which we are all working towards. And with that, perhaps it's not as well known that this process by WHO is a mandate given to WHO by its member states through a World Health Assembly resolution over 6 decades ago, and it has a long history. And I think as an international malaria community, we should understand and recognize its background and purpose set out forth by WHO to better relate the implications of simian malaria on certification. So that's what I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to do, and really just to emphasize the purpose of WHO's certification of malaria-free status, as it's stated in its resolution, is to enter a country into the official global register, which comprises of a list of countries and territories where malaria elimination has been achieved. This register was created by the WHO Director General in 1960 upon the request from member states. Importantly, countries that were added to this register are deemed as safe from malaria, and the risk of malaria transmission has been noted as minimal or negligible. So up until now, certification has been granted to 40 countries and territories. These 40 countries and territories were added to the official register automatically after the certification process was completed, because after having shown the interruption of transmission of the 4 main human species, the risk of contracting malaria infection in these countries was also deemed as minimal. So when we think about simian malaria and the considerations around simian malaria, particularly where I sit at WIPRO and seeing the situation and working with the Ministry of Health in Malaysia, it's very unique. It's quite unique for WHO and for our region. Malaysia, as we know, has reported 0 indigenous cases of the 4 main species for over 3, it's almost 4 years now, which is a tremendously significant public health achievement, and congratulations is in order. It's been a wonderful experience to learn from Malaysia and to hear what they've done to achieve this wonderful goal. But there is still substantial transmission of P. knowlesi in the country. And given this situation, WHO convened several advisory committees earlier this year and last year to review all available evidence of the disease profile around PK and other simian malaria, including a review of the severity and fatality of PK and simian malaria. And WHO also commissioned a review of available data to further look at whether human mosquito-human transmission has occurred. And I know this has been a discussion and a dialogue within the malaria community for many decades. But as Dr. Indra has noted, more work needs to be done. And we really, I think the conclusion is a little bit inconclusive for that evidence. However, during this period, also WHO, during this commissioned review, an analysis of PK data in Malaysia was done, and this served as a background for the discussion with the Ministry of Health around the implications for certification. So the conclusion of the 2 WHO advisory committees noted that simian malaria can infect human, as we know, obviously, and lead to disease and severe disease and death. And we're seeing this even more and more. And as Dr. Indra and others have noted, the trend will rise as other species are eliminated and reduced. The trend in simian malaria seems to be upwards. And so, given the important knowledge gaps, including the extent of human transmission chains, it is not possible to establish a universal and quantitative criterion for simian malaria transmission at this point. And given that elimination of the parasite in the zoonotic hosts is unlikely, for countries where transmission of the 4 main human Plasmodium species has been interrupted, but PK cases continue to occur, certification will depend on careful assessment of the risks. And this is the point that I'd like to make. So really, if the risk is assessed as negligible, and this is still to be determined, then certification can be granted, assuming the country meets the WHO standard criteria. So a final note, I'd just like to mention that WHO, of course, encourages all countries' efforts to achieve malaria elimination, even if the burden is due to zoonotically transmitted malaria. And given the emergent situation of PK and other simian malaria species, as we've heard about today, the advancement as well of the Malaysia program, particularly, and other countries of controlling simian malaria infections, WHO now aims to seek to work closely with its countries to bring down the PK case numbers to allow the consideration of potential certification as early as requested. It's also worth noting that the collaboration between WHO and the Ministries of Health and other partners aims to contribute to the development of strategies and new tools and innovations, which we've heard about today, to control PK in the region. And this is not easy. This has been going on, as I mentioned, for decades, and there's no easy solution. But currently, WHO is planning to convene a technical working group in early next year to move this agenda forward. And of course, WHO recognizes and appreciates the commitment and contribution of all the member states that are dealing with simian malaria, and all the partners who are helping countries to navigate this, as you say, Leo, murky situation, to national, regional, and global efforts to eliminate malaria. So indeed, I think it really will take innovative approaches to solve this ongoing challenge. And WHO obviously continues to support countries in their quest for certification, regardless of what malaria species persist. So I think I've taken enough time here. I want to leave time for Q&A. So back to you, Leo, and thank you for giving me and WHO the floor to comment on the situation, and happy to answer questions that I can. Over.
Yeah, no, it's us who are grateful to you, James. So thank you for those excellent perspectives and the context you created there, and fully echo your congratulations and comments about, you know, the hard work that goes into countries reaching certification of zero local transmission. You know, it's many years of hard dedication and commitment. So, you know, one almost feels sorry, and in a sense, it's almost as though a country like Malaysia is being penalized for something that they really have no control over, and they've achieved what many countries did achieve, at least in terms of you know, the more usually accepted for human plasmodia species. So I wanted to ask you a question, James, but now it slipped my mind. So let me phrase it this way. Certification of having achieved that status of a zero local transmission within the borders of its country. There's no, it's not as though a country had sanctions imposed on it previously, and now all of a sudden some magic door is opening because there's now a signature on a piece of paper, and that now citizens can travel more freely, etc. This is simply an acknowledgement by, of course, a highly esteemed and respected international body that, well done, country X, you've reached that extremely difficult goal, and we acknowledge the effort you put into it and the success you have reached. So we now enroll you in the roll of honor as having reached that point. There's nothing other than that. It's just an acknowledgement of well done. You've done good, and you've proven that you can maintain that status. Is that correct, James?
Oh, thanks, Leo. Yes, I wouldn't put it as such, because I think there is a role within the Secretariat to somewhat note the assessment of risk of malaria transmission. So the question here is regarding, I think, assessment or the risk of malaria, not just having achieved, because there are cases where WHO, now I don't remember the exact cases, but countries that were deemed certified malaria-free lost their certification status after indigenous transmission was reestablished. So I think there's more to it than just an acknowledgement, Leo, in short.
All right, yeah. But there's no penalty associated with it. It's
No.
yeah.
No.
All right. James, again, thank you so much for your very clear explanations and the time you've spent with us. I actually don't see any questions specifically directed at you, James. So while we welcome your presence,
No, it has. We have questions to Dr. James.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Let me
All
just
right, James, I'm going to read out this one to you because I realize that you may be getting a bit anxious to get on with your job. So it's from Richard Colton to Dr. Kelly. I was a little unsure about whether or not P. nullsii transmission will negate malaria-free certification or not. You suggested it would be dealt with on a case-by-case basis and linked to an assumed or measured risk. What are the criteria for assessing such risk? Also, what about countries in which PK transmission is only a problem in a specific region? How does certification proceed in this situation? I think you did explain, but maybe just clarify a little bit, James.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Richard. I think there is still work to be done by WHO to determine what this risk of null-zi malaria is. Negligible risk has to be defined, and there is work with coming in early next year with a technical working group to come together with my understanding with the Ministry of Health of Malaysia and other countries that are having simian malaria in their countries to discuss this and to determine what is this assessment of risk and what does it mean, and try to set more criteria for this. Now, the WHO certification of malaria-free status has two well-established criteria that was mandated back in the 60s, which is 0 indigenous cases for 3 consecutive years, and a program and surveillance system to ensure prevention of reestablishment and adequate surveillance of that. So with those are sort of the standard WHO criteria, but the assessment of risk is something that for simian malaria in particular. So there is guidance around reestablishment of malaria and prevention of reestablishment. And your second point around areas in specific regions within a country, I think this is basically what is happening in Malaysia, because they have foci of transmission where they're having this PK, but the entire country is not sort of seeing this transmission dynamic. It's only where the vector, the primary host is present, so as well as the vector and parasite in human. So I think there's no special circumstance where this, certain certification can proceed if there's still a foci, unless again the assessment of risk is negligible. which, as I mentioned, has to be sort of has to be hashed out with the technical working group. So I hope I've answered Richard's question.
Thank you, James. Wonderful, excellent. So I seem to recall that, Suman, you second on our list in terms of written questions, but I respect the fact that I think you raised your hand very early on, in fact, during the first presentation already. So if you want to voice your question, Wulan, can I ask that you unmute Suman, please? So Suman, if you'd like to tell us, voice your question. Otherwise, I'm just going to read what may be a different question you were wanting to ask. So,
yeah, thanks a lot for the wonderful presentations, Dr. Leo. You see, my impression about the distribution and transmission of P. novelsi is that there are areas and there are people who are studying this particular aspect. But as far as India is concerned, we are not doing much on this particular aspect. But there are reports which are coming in increasingly. From the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is a premier institute in the New Delhi, we had a publication from a doctor saying that 23 cases of novelsi were detected during the last two years. This publication had come. So I feel this is a very, very important aspect, and it would be good to have a direction from WHO regarding the study of this particular aspect of malaria, the novelsi, in the Southeast Asian region countries, based on the already existing studies, so that we are not suddenly surprised after we reduce the cases to a considerable extent. Thank you.
thank you, Suman. Interesting comments about the situation in India. Does anybody want to comment on that, James, or anyone else?
Just quickly, and I think Suman raises a very good point. And, I think this is the situation in Thailand when they started confirming microscopy or suspected malaria cases and confirming by PCR and finding a lot more Knowles-eye malaria. And this indeed could come to surprise countries if they're not actually diagnosing, or confirming uncertain diagnoses, and then find many of those are to be simian malaria. So I agree with you fully, and I think WHO should support India through CRO and globally by understanding what is in this. I think will come with some guidance around diagnosis. Currently, it's up. There's no recommendation to confirm by PCR microbiologically confirmed either through RDT or microscopy is the recommended diagnosis from WHO. So PCR is at the behest of the country if they choose to do that. But I agree with you that there is some uncertainty around if there is suspicious PK cases. So I will note this, and I think we need to discuss this with colleagues about further guidance to countries on PK and diagnosis through PCR possibly, and how to handle this in countries. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Suman. Great. We have another question coming up from you as well, but let's give Vani a chance, who asked, briefly explain the clinical presentation of simian malaria in humans and monkeys. So is it pretty much the same as for falciparum and vivax and the other two, fevers, chills, body aches, headaches, etc.? What are the typical symptoms?
Leo, but I think one of the important things to note is that in the case of simian malaria, like Plasmodium knowlesi, it's a 24-hour cycle, whereas malaria is a 72-hour cycle and falciparum is a 48-hour cycle. So you will find that the parasite multiplies rapidly in the case of Plasmodium knowlesi. So the parasitemia rates are usually very much higher than compared to Plasmodium malariae. But the monkeys are not monkeys, though they have the parasite. They do not show any signs or symptoms. They are fine.
Well, we don't know how they feel because they don't talk to us.
But you don't see them being lethargic. They still seem to be jumping from tree to tree. Yeah, they don't seem to show.
Yeah,
symptoms.
no, I understand. So, Indra, but just to belabor that point, if I may. So, I mean, if you have falciparum malaria, you feel pretty grim. You know you are very sick.
Yeah.
So in the case of Knoll's eye, how does it manifest in terms of severity of symptoms and illness? Is it a relatively mild infection, or do you also feel like, I'm at death's door now and I don't like this? How severe is it?
I don't know. I think that knowlesi have also been has been very severe, because we know that there have been deaths due to Plasmodium knowlesi. So it is not just mild. Maybe for some people it is. I do not know. Again, it depends. Just like the Aborigine people who are in the malarious areas. See, when they get falciparum, they also seem to be walking around, because it's like something that the immunity has helped them, the immune system.
Yeah.
So I think that is quite similar to even to knowlesi, because I know that there have been many deaths due to Plasmodium knowlesi.
Yeah.
And especially from people who never get infected, who have never been infected with malaria. I think when they come down with knowlesi, they will definitely show signs and symptoms. It will be very different from people who have been living in a malaria endemic area, like some of our Aborigine people. I think if they come down with knowlesi, we don't see it in them. But if we test their blood, the blood shows that they are positive. So they are asymptomatic.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Absolute sense. So, I mean, that touches on another aspect that went through my mind. I think somebody made the statement that as falciparum, vivax, and Vale malariae cases decline, there's a trend of Knoll's eye numbers increasing. I think I heard that statement being made. So that's an interesting observation, and it kind of raised the question, is that a real trend, or is it because diagnostics are improving and you're homing in on people that they're showing less severe symptoms, but because they're not clouded by a mass of more severe falciparum, etc. cases, doctors more readily pick up on them? Or is it a case of genuinely more cases because the background, and I'm not sure if this is a correct assumption, that there may be some cross immunity from people in endemic areas with vivax and falciparum, that it reduces the manifestation of illness from Knoll's eye, and therefore you see a pickup in Knoll's eye cases because the other human forms of malaria are now declining. Any comment on that, Indra?
It's very difficult to say that, because now we are looking for it. So the more you look for it, the more you will get.
Yeah. All right.
And now we are using PCR. So I feel that even when we started when I started in 2005, when I used to ask for slides, some of them will tell me that, no, we don't have any PK. But those who were interested and who sent in blood, we were able to detect PK by PCR. So I feel that generally, if the vectors are there, the parasite is there, the chances of human being infected is high.
Thank you.
So we really need to do something to try and break the chain of transmission between how to do it, because now we have another host coming in. Now we have the monkey.
Yeah,
So how?
no, absolutely.
That is the biggest challenge I feel that we are facing.
Yeah. So I personally have multiple questions, but to be fair on our audience, I'm going to run through their questions as a priority. Here's one from Suman. Phenolzy and other zoonotic parasites are important. Is it possible to specify the geographical areas of distribution of Nolzi in Indonesia? You know, are there certain areas where the incidence is higher than in other areas, and maybe why is that? Is that because of you know, the palm oil plantations and associated breeding sites available, you know, areas of forest, etc.? Any comments about patchiness of distribution and what would be prime areas in which you know, Nolzi would flourish in preference to other areas? Ibrahim?
Yeah, I can give a comment on that. Well, the first thing to realize is that research on zoonotic malaria, specifically Pinolzi in Indonesia, is still very much ongoing and starting. So we don't know much yet, but what we know of it is that, well, like I said, the areas where there is a lot of palm oil plantation and production, like North Sumatra specifically, but also Kalimantan, where there is a lot of palm oil and a lot of well, agricultural developments in general, we see higher cases, higher number of cases of Pinolzi in humans as well. And as we speak at this moment, people are studying this in North Kalimantan, in that region. They're collecting mosquitoes, they're doing surveys on human behavior, and that research is still very much ongoing. So I hope we can, in a couple of years, trace spread of Pinolzi from forests to other areas. But at the moment, I just agree with Suman that it would be very interesting to know this. But maybe Dr. Ibrahim has something more to say about this.
Ibrahim?
Yeah, could you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please,
Okay.
please go ahead.
In fact, I'm sorry for the mix between Francais and English, but because I just couple days moved from France, so I'm kind of mixed between French and English. So in fact, in Indonesia, starting this second semester of 2022, Institut Ministry of Health has been start a sentinel survey for Pinolzi. So it means the number exact of Pinolzi cases in Indonesia has grown by Ministry of Health due to the waiting list or administration or publication, which took very long time, I think. So that we found just 545 cases from the first case founded 2010 up to last year, 2021. The question, it is possible to trace? Yes, it is very possible, but quite difficult compared with neighboring countries like Malaysia, like Thailand, because Indonesia is huge archipelago. That's why we, especially for Ministry of Health, need huge energy, resources, and all the facilities to support this sentinel survey. But is Ministry of Health take this very important in terms of elimination target in 2030. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's a useful contribution. Thank you, Ibrahim. So just to add on a little bit, okay, so palm oil plantations and so on favor breeding by the vectors, but you don't, it's not just only the vectors. You must have places that favor the host, the primate host as well. So I'm not sure, whether palm oil plantations are a prime area to sustain macaques.
Yeah, in my opinion, I don't think palm plantation is the primary factor of the transmission of Pinot because like in early 2000 or before 2000, there are research in Kalimantan that state harbor Plasmodium speciosa in orangutan. And recently, couple years ago, the researchers claimed it was Plasmodium knowlesi. And orangutan doesn't, I think, doesn't live in palm plantation.
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. So I don't want to dwell on this too long, but there's this interesting anomaly, so okay, you get certain habitats that favor the vector, let's say palm oil plantations, but then you also get certain areas that favor the primates, like built up areas, humans, where they get fed or the food gets left deliberately and populations expand significantly. So you get a lot of primate hosts that could host the knowlesi parasites, but then maybe it doesn't favor the vectors. So it's that ideal perfect storm situation where you have, humans, parasites, and the vectors coexisting in optimal combination that promotes ideal transmission and maintenance of non-human malaria. So very interesting situation that. Okay, let's move on to Amila, who asks, probably from an Indian perspective, can Anopheles culicifacies transmit P. knowlesi, or is it only Leucosphaerus? Anybody want to?
Leo, I think I'd like to mention earlier that I will talk on this. Now, actually, we dissect all Anopheles mosquitoes that we obtain during our studies. So we examine the midgut, we examine the salivary glands. If they're positive, then we subject them to PCR. So we have so far incriminated only the Leucosphaerus group as vectors. That means we have seen the ooses, we have seen sporozoites, and PCR has proved them to be positive for simian malaria parasites. Now, when it comes to the other Anopheles mosquitoes, we have seen it in the Ambrosus group, Anopheles latifa. We found ooses, but when we subjected the ooses to PCR, it becomes positive for Plasmodium, but it does not speciate to the human or to any of the simian malaria parasites. So by the time we keep on trying, we have already exhausted our DNA, but we feel that we know that latifa is a vector for tragoli, that's Moustium malaria. So that is why I feel it is very important that we subject all the mosquitoes to dissection, look for it, and then do PCR. Then you are definite whether it is a vector or not. Because we have seen sporozoites in Anopheles donaldi, but when we subjected it to PCR, we cannot get it to be positive for any of the species. So we don't know whether, I can't really say whether it is no, though other people have done it on whole mosquitoes and said they have found Donaldite to be positive. So that's why I always advocate, if you want to incriminate a new species, it is best to do, to dissect all the mosquitoes, look for it. Because earlier studies, in those days, 60s, when they did studies, they did find that when they exposed the mosquitoes, they did find other species, non-leuco group of mosquitoes becoming infected.
Fascinating.
So that is my answer.
Yeah,
to
no,
that.
that's great response. Indra, you raise a fascinating issue there. I mean, you made the comment that when you test some of the vectors that you suspect because of dissection of hosting Plasmodium, you can't arrive at a species diagnosis. And it raised the issue of, you know, there's more to this world than what we know right now, that there are other Plasmodium species as well. There's avian Plasmodium, avian malaria, there's rodent malaria. Give us an idea. I think you get Plasmodium in reptiles as well. What other groups host Plasmodium species, Indra?
Avians do, then of course is the other, I'm not reptile. I mean, reptiles do this reptiles. And I think all the other rats and mouse deer.
Yeah, so
the other thing is that, like, we have found when we set up monkey bait trap, we have found other Anopheles species, not the leuco, the non-leuco group also attracted to the monkeys. Like, we found a lot of Anopheles cocci going to the monkeys, but all those that we dissected, none of them had oocysts or sporozoites in them. You see, though they're attracted, we can't. And the other thing, I know another person has asked about resting site. That is another problem we have had. In all our research, when we try to look for resting mosquitoes, we are not able to get resting mosquitoes. I do not know where they are resting. So finally, in one of our blood meal paper, the student Nanda, he did a different kind of analysis, and he found that if we do mosquitoes that are coming to bite us, we can find their previous blood meal from the DNA. It still shows the presence of the previous blood meal it has taken. So in that way, we were able to publish a blood meal analysis paper to show, okay, where are these mosquitoes feeding on?
That's fascinating.
But we cannot know, because to me, if we can know the resting mosquito, at least we can try some control methods in those areas. But we are having a problem. But we had one master's student. Lucky her master's was like coursework plus a dissertation, and she came out 3 months to Sabah, and she combed the whole area where there were macaques, where we used to find positive mosquitoes, and she just couldn't get a resting mosquito, Anopheles mosquito.
Yeah, thank you, Indra. Well, that largely addresses the question by Bina. I have one question. I see very few studies regarding resting places of vector species, which is very important to know the human blood index. So you've commented on the lack of evidence and difficulty in finding the resting sites. Ibrahim, do you want to make a general comment? I mean, one of you had in your slide, I think it was Brahm, you showed that according to the WHO categorization, little is known about the resting sites for some of these vector species. Do you confirm that again?
Yeah, that's as far as we know now, that's true. In my review of a lot of different publications, which did not include, I have to add, the malaria control programs of countries, those reports, but still, we haven't found any report actually of resting sites of these Leucospherus mosquitoes. Seems like they're so elusive, nobody can actually find them.
Thank you, Brahm. So here's a question from Nanta. Question to Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you for your presentation. In your opinion, why is there significantly lower cases of null-Zi reported in Kalimantan, Borneo compared to Malaysian Borneo, although there are neighboring areas sharing similar ecotypes, vector and macaque hosts? Do you want to speculate maybe? You know, is it a intensity of investigations, density of people, differences in the habitats? What is it that underlies that difference in case numbers of null-Zi between the two neighboring regions? Ibrahim?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. And thank you for the question. I think this is a very interesting question because lately, a couple of articles say that there are no parallel relation between the Malaysia, Borneo cases and Kalimantan cases. But in Indonesia, where we found a lot of technology cases was contributed by active survey. This is also the answer for Wulan, I think. So the first question about the most cases of technology cases in Indonesia found in North Sumatra. It was a chapter from thesis dissertation Dr. Lubis that published in 2017, if I didn't mistake. So it's quite it would be nice if we have in Indonesia already started couple years before for something sentinel survey, but due to the few things, maybe Ministry of Health can be done in this year. I think for the real sentinel will be held next year. So based on the data that we found in the article, why there are less cases in Kalimantan compared with Sumatra, because more research held in Sumatra. That's the answer. I hope that should answer the question.
Yeah, that helps. That helps. Thank you so much, Ibrahim, for responding to that. Okay, here's a question from Tenzin Wangdi. Good to connect again, Tenzin. And he asks this of you as well, Ibrahim, but I'm going to open it up. Any of our speakers, if you want to respond. If null-Zi is misdiagnosed as human malaria, so if a patient goes to a doctor and the doctor says, okay, you've got malaria, and I'm going to treat you with the usual treatment for falciparum, for example, is the treatment regime different, or is does the patient respond to treatment for falciparum or Vivax?
Can I answer the question, Dr. Lee?
Sorry, please respond, Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting question. In Indonesia, we use for all types of malaria, we use hydroartemisinin piperacin, but different dose of primacin. Special for phenolizide, confirmed cases and suspects, Ministry of Health proposed use the regime first line, just like the treatment called falciparum. And based on the history of the patient, it all passes. There are no secondary effects or severe after the treatment. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ibrahim, and apologies for me coughing like that. So here's a question from Nurul. Thank you for great sharing of information, Indra, Brahm, and Ibrahim. I'd like to ask, is there any possibility of other natural reservoir hosts aside from macaques? Many of the affected populations are living in rural areas, thus the livelihood and lifestyle are intimately associated with forests. What is your opinion on the extent of current preventive measures and in what ways could it be improved? Okay, so it's separate questions. Maybe you could just speculate. Anybody want to speculate on that? There's a third element to Dr. Ibrahim, but let's first speculate about the first two bits.
I would love to answer for the first.
Please go ahead, Ibrahim.
Okay. As I said earlier, a couple of years ago, the researcher confirmed that the report in the early 20s, year 20s, that he found as Plasmodium speciosa or other Plasmodium, but not Plasmodium vivax falciparum malaria ovale. A couple of years ago, he confirmed that it is Plasmodium knowlesi, harbored in orangutan, Kalimantan. So, is the question: is it possible to find another host like
It
other
would seem
primates?
there are
Very
other
interesting.
hosts.
Yeah.
Ibrahim, there's another question to you. In Indonesia, is the malaria screening free of charge?
Yeah.
When patients go to a health facility, are they diagnosed and treated free of charge?
I don't know exactly because I'm not part of the Ministry of Health, but in the rural area, it is encouraged, and I can confirm in rural area of Indonesia, it is free of charge.
Okay,
especially
thank
in
you.
endemic area.
Yeah. Brahm, you've got experience there as well. Any comments?
Yeah, in the rural areas where I've been, which was only North Sumatra, to be honest, malaria screening was free of charge in the Puskesmas, in the local health facility. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Question from Prudence. Hi, Prudence, good to have you on board. To all our participants or all our speakers, is chloroquine effective in treating simian malaria, or should all cases be treated with ACTs? Indra.
If I'm not mistaken, now they use ACT for treatment. That's what they do in Malaysia. They're not using chloroquine anymore.
Okay. What about Indonesia, Ibrahim?
Yeah, in Indonesia, we don't use chloroquine anymore because we
Chloroquine.
found in the couple of areas, we found the resistance of chloroquine.
Okay, okay. Brahm, you confirm that in the areas you've worked in?
Yeah, it's all ACT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So from Ranjit, dear Prof. Indra, is directed at you, Indra. Thank you for your informative presentation. What about P. malariae being reported in some countries? Can some of them have been P. knowlesi or other simian plasmodia? Is it, is there a great similarity between malariae and knowlesi under the microscope? Is it easy to resolve the two by way of microscopy? And what would be the best way? PCR? How do you distinguish between the different plasmodium species? And how easy is it?
I think it's not easy unless you're a very, very good microscopist, because the early stages, the ring forms look like of PK also looks like PF, and the band form of PM looks also like PK look alike. So that is why we always now subject to PCR. But of course, in those days, if you remember, if you read through literature, the first case when they found, the first day they said the guy is suffering from PF because they found the ring form. And a day later, they found the band form, and then they said he's suffering from malaria. But fortunately, they have inoculated the blood into the monkey, and then it turned out the monkey was positive. So they knew that he was suffering from PK. So now all, if you see samples like that, you need to subject them to PCR to confirm that we are dealing with the correct species, especially in Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Indra. So here's a question from Waykit. I'd like to ask, do you think it is possible to administer chemoprophylaxis to macaques in order to reduce infection? I think you're asking for problems with development of resistance, because presumably, well, you can't immobilize each monkey and give it an injection. There are just too many monkeys. It would be massive costs. So presumably you add the drug to a biscuit or some food and you leave it out for macaques to eat, but then you have no control over the dose that is being taken up by the monkeys, either underdosed or overdosed, and you're asking for problems with development of resistance. I think it's just that's a practically impossible task. Any comment on that issue, Indra?
I don't know, but I think that there's some groups that they are thinking along that line, whether it's possible to treat the macaques and to try to get rid of the parasites from the macaques, because we just do not have any idea of how we're going to tackle the mosquitoes. And so they're thinking along that line. So that's why I also brought in ivermectin, because someone one time, and I think once when I was presenting, someone from Thailand, Koblenski, I think, said that there is a way that perhaps ivermectin would help. So that's why now I have thrown in ivermectin into perhaps one of the possible. So these things need to be studied to see, at least in a control group of monkeys, to see whether it has got some effect.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely with you about ivermectin. That's addressing the vector, not the parasite, and it kills the mosquito rather than the parasites. So I also, agree with you. Ivermectin deserves much serious consideration. Another one from Waykit and again, it's to you, Indra. Other than the leucospirus group, research in Sarawak has found Barbirostris and Ambrosis group as vectors of nullsii. Shall the future investigation focus not only on leucospirus, but also the other two groups as well? So how do you feel, how well is the vector status known, the primary vectors of nullsii and the other simian malaria species? Is there still some uncertainty that deserves much more research effort? Or is it pretty well established what the main vectors are, Indra?
I think we are quite confident of the main vectors. And as I said, when we catch our mosquitoes for any studies that we do, we dissect all Anopheles mosquitoes. We don't just look at the leucospirus group of mosquitoes. We dissect and look at all Anopheles mosquitoes. And so far, this has been our finding. So if we, so that's what I would actually recommend to everybody, is to look, to try and dissect all mosquitoes. At least if they're not able to get salivary glands, at least look for oocysts on the midgut, because it's very easy to remove the midgut and examine for oocysts. So at least if you see oocysts, and then if you subject the rest of it to PCR, if it turns out PCR, at least we can say, okay, we saw oocysts, the chances of finding sporozoites is also there. So at least you can correlate. But if not, if you just subject the whole mosquito to PCR and say it is positive, then I feel that leaves a question mark. That's something unanswered because, as I said, we dissect all. And we have found oocysts, we have found sporozoites, but from the other mosquitoes, we have not been able to speciate them out as yet.
Yeah, good response. Thank you, Indra. So unless there are other questions coming in, here's a last one from, and I apologize for almost certainly mispronouncing your name, Dejeen. Thank you for all the wonderful presentations. My question is, why is Null's eye malaria restricted to Asian countries and prominently in Malaysia? Is it due to presence of this monkey or the parasite's nature? Is the parasite able to develop in other monkey species? So just quick response, you know, all parasites have their preferred hosts and they're adapted to a particular, in this case, not just the primary host, but also the mosquito vector. So, you know, you need the three things. You need the parasite, you need the vector, and you need the primate host, whether human or non-human. So it depends on the overlap of distribution of those three, where you find people, where you find natural host, primate, and where you find the vectors all together. That's where you will find that malaria persisting and circulating. So it's a defined geographic region. Do you want to comment on that question, perhaps, Indra?
Yeah, I think besides Southeast Asia, the Andaman Islands have also reported cases of Plasmodium knowlesi. Perhaps the Andaman Islands is actually very close to Southeast Asia when you look at it in terms of India. Though it belongs to India, it's very close to Southeast Asia. And there they have reported cases of knowlesi. So I'm not sure what about the other part, because you can see that the distribution of the long-tailed macaques and the distribution of the vector, they are quite like within the Southeast Asia region. But of course, there are other species of primate malaria, simian malaria in macaques in Sri Lanka and also in, I think, parts of India, the southern part of India. So I'm not sure whether that can be transmitted to human and what are their vectors. I'm not sure, but I think it is that leucospirus group that which they are previously had. I think it was Anopheles mirans, if I'm not mistaken, that was supposed to be the vector. So I'm not very sure whether they can be transmitted to human, whether any work has been done on that. I'm not sure, but I know that there are species that do exist there. I hope that answers the question. Maybe they need to look for it.
Yeah, but Indra, I mean, there's a valid point being made there. Maybe it's just a poor understanding from my side, at least. It does seem as though Malaysia is a particular hotspot within the broader region within which Null's eye occurs, as also the macaques, as also the vectors. Why Malaysia? Why is Malaysia a hotspot? Is Malaysia a hotspot? And if it is a hotspot, why?
I think we have been looking very, we have been studying this very closely from 2005 onwards, since Bal Singh presented his paper, and the paper was published in 2004. So we have been working on it for such a long time. So I feel like now Indonesia is coming up. So I think in years to come, you will find that Indonesia will be reporting a lot of cases, a lot of papers will be coming out, and so will Thailand. Because all countries did report at that time that at least there were a few cases, but then perhaps now they are so involved with human malaria that maybe they're not looking into this. So if more and more people start to do research and look into it and human malaria comes down, I think they will be reporting. It will, Southeast Asia will become like a hotspot. I'm quite confident of that.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating aspect, that Malaysia is a hotspot because Indra is in Malaysia and she's been working so much on nullsai and simian malaria and so on. So, I mean, that's a very appropriate observation. Where there are people looking for it, that's where you will find it. You know, if you're in an area where people aren't looking for it, then you don't find it and it's not reported. So, I mean, absolutely valid comments there, Indra, that, you know, Indonesia is now also expending a lot of effort in research on these aspects. And more knowledge is coming to the fore from that region. And, you know, if you start digging around in some other countries, perhaps you'll find that there too, it's more common than people maybe in earlier years expected. So, you know, we've reached the end of our webinar. I want to ask okay, I'm going to open it up in a moment. I just want to ask our audience and everyone, if you wouldn't mind to respond to a short poll, just to tick a few boxes that tells us, you know, how effectively we're doing our job and what can we improve on and so on. Are there any other questions anyone would like to raise or comments anybody would like to make? So I would like to thank our backroom team, Dr. Pon, Dr. Popo Ong, Wulan, for your wonderful job in making sure that technically the webinar flowed well, there were no glitches, everything was ready and prepared. So to our technical team, sincere thank you for your efforts. To our wonderful panel of presenters for your time. Excellent presentations, top quality presentations, top quality responses in Q&A session. Your patience in sitting through, even James is still with us, I think. So to all of you, and then our wonderful audience as well, hanging in there, your patience, sitting through it all, giving us a good series of questions. To all of you, each of you, sincere thank you for your participation. And we look forward to further webinars next year. May you all go well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.